Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The safety of all who are attending this meeting is of utmost importance. I respectfully beg your indulgence as I briefly highlight procedures to be followed in the unlikely event that we have to evacuate this venue. There are 3 primary exits next to the lifts marked as Exit B. On the southeastern side of the general reception area under the glass dome marked as Exit A. On the northern side, down the stairs, past the conference center syndicate rooms, marked as Exit C. Should you be uncertain about any of these exits, please don't hesitate to ask conference center personnel to point them out to you. Evacuations will be initiated by the activation of a siren, announcement over the public address system, or you'll be informed by the conference center personnel. Sub-conference center personnel will take charge and direct all building evacuations. Please do not panic during an evacuation. Remain calm, follow the guidance of the sub-conference center personnel or protection services personnel. Follow the evacuation officials to the designated assembly points. And lastly, all attendees are kindly requested to keep their mobile devices on silence, especially during the course of the meeting. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nimrod. Shareholders, members of the Board of Directors of the South African Reserve Bank, Deputy Governor and Deputy Governors Designate, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I hereby declare the 99th Annual Ordinary General Meeting, AGM, duly constituted in terms of the regulations framed under the South African Reserve Bank Act number 90 of 1989, as amended hereinafter referred to as the Sub-Act. I would like to advise that the meeting is being recorded. Allow me to introduce my colleagues on the podium with me. They are Deputy Governor Naidu, Ms. Nomfundo Chasivana, the Deputy Governor Designate, Dr. Rashad Kasim, Deputy Governor Designate, the Chairperson of the Audit Committee, Mr. Rob Barrow, the Chairperson of the Remuneration Committee, Ms. Yvonne Muthian, Chairperson of the Board Risk and Ethics Committee, Mr. Firoz Kachalia, the Chairperson of the Non-Executive Directors Committee, Mr. Gary Rafi, the General Counsel of the South African Reserve Bank, Mr. Johan Diaga, and the Secretary of the South African Reserve Bank, Ms. Sheena Reynolds. Before I start my address, can I ask if everyone has signed the attendance register? Even if you are not a shareholder, please do sign the register and also indicate who you are representing to ensure that we have a complete attendance record of the meeting. All shareholders present who hold 200 or more shares in the SAB and who are entitled to vote in accordance with the provisions of the SAB Act and its regulations should be in possession of an electronic voting device. Please indicate if you are a shareholder entitled to vote but have not yet registered or received the voting device. All shareholders, you have got the voting device. It looks like a BlackBerry kind of thing. Please note that only shareholders or their valid proxies will be permitted to speak during the formalities of this meeting. Every shareholder should have received a yellow laminated card on registration. This card must please be raised for identification purposes when a shareholder wishes to comment or ask a question at this meeting. As you can see, I do not have one of those yellow cards because I am not a shareholder. Allow me now to move on to my formal address. The past year began with significant changes for emerging markets, including South Africa. In contrast to the synchronized pickup in economic growth of 2017, which had surprised most observers by its magnitude, the major economies began to display divergent growth patterns in 2018. While the United States maintained a strong pace of growth amid a sizable fiscal stimulus and a buoyant labor market, the Eurozone and Japan lost some momentum. Chinese demand felt the negative impact of earlier monetary and regulatory tightening. Growth in world trade volumes also began to slow, a move that was exacerbated by a flare-up in trade tensions as the US slapped tariff increases on certain imports. This influence of factors, together with negative current account and price movements in countries like Argentina and Turkey, resulted in downward pressure on emerging market currencies and fixed income assets. This move was compounded by the appreciation of the US dollar as investors anticipated a further normalization of US monetary policy and a widening of interest rate differentials with other major economies. By early July 2018, the South African rand had depreciated by 12% against the US dollar from its peak of mid-February, a decline that extended to 25% when the rand reached its trough in September 2018. So what has changed since then? Some of the concerns about global growth that prevailed in mid-2018 have proved accurate. Business confidence, trade flows, and economic activity has continued to lose momentum in most of the major economies. Now that the impact of the 2018 fiscal stimulus has started to fade, the US is not immune to those trends. The trade tensions had sprung up more than a year ago, remain unresolved despite the June truce between China and the US that prevented an immediate tariff escalation. Geopolitical tensions, especially in the Middle East, are adding to a climate of uncertainty that weighs on business investment decisions globally. In this month's update on the World Economic Outlook, the International Monetary Fund is projecting global economic growth of 3.2% this year compared to a forecast of 3.9% a year ago. Support for the global economy and financial markets, however, has come in the form of a quick change of tack by the world's major central banks as they shifted from a gradual removal of stimulus to indicating renewed easing, at least in the US and in the Eurozone. The lack of inflation pressures provides room for such an approach. In fact, core inflation in both the US and the Eurozone is currently short of its 2% decline, 2%, the machine is doing its things here, 2% target, while oil prices amid slowing global demand are off the highs reached in October 2018. Meanwhile, in China, the authorities have loosened both fiscal and monetary policies in an attempt to limit the pace of economic deceleration. Against such a background, emerging market assets have rallied, and with inflation generally showing only a limited response to last year's currency depreciation in several emerging countries, the scope for their central banks to provide at least some accommodation has increased. This less favorable global growth and trade environment has added to South Africa's economic concerns at a time when the domestic drivers of growth were already stuttering. Addressing this audience a year ago, I highlighted how the rebound in business optimism following changes in political leadership led to a resurgence in optimism, but that has begun to erode in the second quarter of 2018. This erosion has unfortunately continued over the past 12 months. Both the Rand Merchant Bank and BER survey of businesses, as well as other indicators, such as the ABSA Purchasing Managers Index and the SACHI Trade Conditions Indicator, are signaling low business confidence amid challenging environment in all sectors. Such low business confidence, coupled with uncertainty about the future economic growth, has weighed particularly heavily on private sector fixed investment, which contracted by 2.5% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2019, and overall has stagnated over the past half-decade. Weak private sector fixed investment has indeed been a key cause of the disappointing performance of South African gross domestic product growth. Much has been said and written about the sharp contraction in the first quarter GDP growth during the course of this year. The contraction was 3.2% on an annualized basis, and what was asked was whether it was a true reflection of the state of the economy. There is no denying that from quarter to quarter, GDP has been quite volatile of late. Indeed, the SAP's internal econometric models estimate that activity will recoup part of the first quarter decline in the second quarter of the year. That said, the less volatile year-on-year comparison shows that GDP growth slowed to 0 in the first quarter of the year, which was the weakest performance in exactly 3 years, and one that was indeed consistent with other indicators of activity. And while our models envisage an improvement in the remaining quarters of the year, the SAP projects GDP growth of only 0.6% in 2019 after 0.8% in 2018. This means that in both years, as indeed in all but one of the past 4 years, real GDP would grow slower than the population growth rate of 1.6%, thus contracting on a per capita basis. Weak economic growth does not just hinder efforts to reduce poverty and inequality, it also weakens public finances. For the current year, National Treasury projects that the consolidated government deficit will rise to 4.5% of GDP and will only decline to 4.3% next year. By contrast, in the 2018 budget, projections were for a deficit of only 3.6% of GDP for both fiscal years. This computer ate my homework. This computer ate my homework, and so I will have to revert to what I had always been good at, which is to read from what I had written here. No, it's because the pages here differ from the ones I have here.
Okay, the heading inflation.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. I just talked about the fiscus, and now let me turn to the inflation area. In a constrained economic environment, it is not unexpected that some voices argue that monetary policy could do more to support economic growth. But what exactly is the SAP's margin of maneuver, bearing in mind that any policy move must comply with our mandate of price and financial stability? Encouragingly, the past year has seen several favorable developments in the inflation front. First, headline consumer price inflation averaged 4.6% between July 2018 and June 2019 and stood at 4.5% over the past month. Overall, this is a more benign pace of increase than the SAP had projected a year ago, even against a background of higher oil prices. Significant rand depreciation and a 1 percentage point increase in the rate of value-added tax in 2018. Second, the SAP's quarterly projection model now forecasts average inflation of 5.1% in 2020 and 4.6% in 2021, both well within the inflation target range. In fact, our projections for the less volatile core inflation rate are even closer to the midpoint of our inflation target range. Finally, several measures of inflation expectations, including the quarterly BER survey of inflation expectations amongst analysts, businesses and unions, as well as the bond market-based metrics, have shown a steady decline over the past year, after many years of remaining uncomfortably close to the top end of the target range. Faced with rising long-term upside risks to the inflation outlook, the SAP felt that it was appropriate to act against such risks, especially in light of policy normalization in advanced economies, which would most likely imply a higher neutral real rate for a small open economy like South Africa. Hence, in November 2018, the Monetary Policy Committee decided to raise the repurchase rate by 25 basis points, reversing the cut that had been implemented in March of the same year. By early 2019, though, inflation performance was more benign than anticipated, and the risks to the inflation outlook had eased sufficiently enough for the SAP to maintain an unchanged policy stance. At the time of the latest meeting held on the 18th of July 2019, the MPC felt comfortable enough with the recent downward trend in inflation outcomes, as well as the ongoing decline in inflation expectations, to lower the repo rate by 25 basis points. Overall, when looking back at the past few years, it is important to acknowledge the progress that has been made in reducing inflation volatility in South Africa, including in response to exchange rate shifts, and how this has allowed for a better anchoring of inflation expectations, and in turn, how this has also limited the need for sharp monetary adjustments. Since 2016, surveyed inflation expectations have declined by 100 basis points. A more stable and predictable path of interest rates will enhance the environment for sustained economic growth, as the experience of many advanced economies, and increasingly also the emerging economies, has shown. The persistence of such gains is, however, not certain, meaning that the MPC will continue to exercise vigilance in the years ahead. With the implementation of the Financial Sector Regulations Act number 9 of 2017, in April last year, the SARP was provided with an explicit statutory mandate to protect and enhance financial stability. The Financial Sector Regulations Act further requires the SARP to monitor and keep under review the strengths and weaknesses of the financial system, as well as any risks to the financial stability. To this end, the SARP has developed frameworks for identifying, monitoring, and mitigating systemic risks. On the whole, the SARP currently assesses the financial sector to be strong and stable. Nevertheless, potential vulnerabilities exist, as we have observed in few emerging trends over the past year, particularly in the banking sector. While South African banks remain adequately capitalized and profitable, the implementation of the new expected credit loss accounting standard, namely IFRS 9, has resulted in a deterioration in the quality of credit in bank books. Furthermore, a persistently low domestic economic growth starts to have an increasingly tangible impact on the balance sheets of both households and corporates. Credit quality may be expected to deteriorate further. During the course of 2018, the SARP undertook stress tests on 6 major banks to assess the resilience of the banking sector to hypothetical yet extreme macroeconomic shocks. The outcome of the 2018 Common Scenario Stress Test exercise suggests that at an aggregate level, the South African banking sector would be able to withstand the possible materialization of a confluence of the main financial stability risks. With respect to solvency, the banks were assessed to be capable of maintaining their capital levels above the minimum capital adequacy requirements under the adverse macroeconomic scenarios considered. The SARP also discovered that no material risks were emanating from the liquidity positions of the 6 major South African banks. The SARP regularly conducts an assessment of the prevailing financial stability risks. These assessments are reported to the Financial Stability Committee and published biannually in the Financial Stability Review. The risks identified since the second quarter of 2018, which currently form part of the SARP's assessment, include a deteriorating fiscal position exacerbated by, amongst other things, weak domestic growth, a poor revenue outlook, and the fragile financial positions of SOEs. Spillovers from weak global economic growth, the possibility of renewed and unexpected tightening in global financial conditions, and the subsequent potential rapid repricing of risks, and lastly, rising cyber dependency and security risks attributed to the ever-increasing digital interconnection of people, systems, and organizations. The identification and monitoring of financial stability risks, while important, would be rendered ineffective if we did not have the necessary tools at our disposal to mitigate the occurrence and or the impact of these risks. Over the past few years, the SARP has been actively developing a macroprudential framework complete with tools and instruments. This past year, work continued to enhance the framework and the financial stability toolkit. There is a saying about the best laid plans of mice and men. Thus, while the SAP ultimately aims to mitigate systemic risks. It also needs to plan for potential crises and how to deal with them. In this regard, the SAP has taken a number of significant steps towards strengthening South Africa's resolution framework over the past year. 2 separate but related projects were initiated in this area, namely to implement a resolution framework and a deposit insurance scheme. The resolution framework, once promulgated into law, will bring South Africa's resolution framework in line with the Financial Stability Board's key attributes for effective resolution regimes. This framework will also formalize the SAP's role as the resolution authority and will outline the responsibilities with respect to the orderly resolution of designated financial institutions. Meanwhile, the imminent establishment of the Corporation for Deposit Insurance as a subsidiary of the SAP will provide explicit guarantees to protect depositors should a bank ever fail. As a result, not only will depositor confidence in this banking system be enhanced, the CODI will also assist government that in the FISRA lays the foundations and the financial system regulatory architecture for the Twin Peaks model of regulation. The Twin Peaks regulators being the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, the FISCA, and the Prudential Authority, the PA, work alongside the SAP and other regulatory bodies to ensure the stability. On the 1st of April 2018 and has been operating within the administration of the SAP as prescribed by FISRA. While much of the first year was spent on refining and implementing the PA also had to complete the resolution of VBS Mutual Bank. On the 25th of June this year, the PA released its first annual report, which reflects all its activities for the 2018-2019 fiscal year. The debate about the proposed nationalization of the SAP continues in the public domain, fueled by perceptions that private shareholders have control over the central bank. The SAP has clarified on a number of occasions and through various communication channels that its private shareholders participate akin to that of preference shareholders and do not own or control the SAP, nor do they influence monetary policy. Repeatedly been saying in the public domain. The board of the SAP focuses on governance issues, while policy and regulatory decisions remain the preserve of the governor and the deputy governors. The South African Reserve Bank Act number 90 of 1989 provides for 15 board directors, 8 of which are appointed by the president, including the governor and the 3 deputy governors, whilst the remaining 7 directors are nominated by shareholders. As shareholders of the SAP, you are fully aware that the SAP Act prescribes that no shareholder or their associates are allowed to beneficially hold more than 10,000 shares. A fixed annual dividend of 10 cents per share is issued if profits are made, resulting in the potential total annual dividend payout to shareholders by the SAP being limited to 200,000 rands. After setting aside contingencies, reserves, tax and the like, 90% of any remaining surplus accrues to the government. Put simply, the discussion about the nationalization of the Reserve Bank is a 200,000 rand discussion. As I draw to the close, let me remind you that this year we are marking 25 years of democracy in South Africa. And we are marking this at the SAP through the launch of a new commemorative circulation and collectible coins under the theme SA25. This series includes 6 new commemorative circulation coins, 5 themed 2 rand coins, and a themed 5 rand coin. Through these coins, we celebrate the Constitution, more specifically, the Bill of Rights, which is considered to be the cornerstone of our democracy. We picked this theme because, aside from being the most iconic feature of our democracy, the Constitution provides for independent institutions, including the SAP. It defines our price stability mandate. The inflation targeting framework aims to ensure that inflation remains low to preserve the purchasing power of households and the competitiveness of firms. We have endeavored to ensure that the financial system remains safe and that our policies aim to bolster the resilience of the economy. Let me just conclude by stating that as the public debate about the role of central banks continue, the SAP has ensured that it continues to execute its mandate in public interest. In this regard, we have endeavored to be transparent in the execution of our duties, including by providing clear reasons for our decisions and clarifying the limitations on our ability to influence long-term economic growth. In all our decisions, we must consider the trade-offs between short-term and long-term gains. Anchoring inflation expectations, gaining credibility, and building institutional capacity are all important elements in enhancing the resilience of the South African economy. That concludes my address, and I would now like to move to the formal part of the agenda. Let me then state what we would be covering in this agenda. The first thing that we're going to consider is to receive and accept the minutes of the AGM held on the 27th of July 2018. Secondly, we are going to receive and consider the SAP's annual financial statements for the financial year ended 31st of March 2019, including the Director's Report and the Independent External Auditor's Report. Third, to approve the remuneration of the SAP's independent external auditors, being PricewaterhouseCoopers Incorporated and SNG Grant Thomson Incorporated, for completing the audit for the 2018-2019 financial year in terms of Regulation 22.1 subsection B, read with Regulation 7.3 subsection C of the regulations. Fourthly, to approve the appointment of PricewaterhouseCoopers Incorporated as SNG Grant Thomson Incorporated as the SAP's independent external auditors for 2019-2020 financial year. Fifthly, to elect 3 non-executive directors to serve on the SAP's board of directors. And finally, to consider any further business arising from the items just mentioned in terms of Regulation 7.3 subsection E of the regulations. I confirm that the Secretary of the SAP received no request for special business in terms of section Regulation 7.3 subsection D of the regulations. I now call on Ms. Sheena Reynolds, the Secretary of the SAP, to confirm the shareholder representation at this meeting. Ms. Reynolds.
Thank you, Governor. Apologies for the croaky voice this morning. I'm pleased to confirm that the total number of shares in the issued share capital of the SARB is 2 million. 25 shareholders are present in person, 8 shareholders are represented by proxy, and 463 votes are exercisable by the shareholders present and those holding duly certified proxy forms for this purpose.
Thank you, Secretary. I have determined that voting on each of the matters under consideration at the AGM will take place by means of a poll conducted electronically. The electronic voting procedure is facilitated by an independent external party, Lumi Technologies SA Pty Limited. Can I request Mr. Kabelo Mafole from Lumi to come forward and instruct those present on how to use the voting device? KB.
Good morning, Governor, Deputy Governor, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen. As the Governor mentioned earlier, those present and eligible to vote at the meeting will have received a device like this, looks like a BlackBerry, and also with a smart card, a white smart card inserted in it. Please ensure that it is correctly inserted on the top of the smart card of the handset, and your name and the number of shares that you represent will appear on the screen. When the Governor invites us to vote, you will then proceed to press number 1 to vote in favor of a resolution, number 2 to vote against a resolution, and if you wish to abstain, you'll then press number 3. If at any point you feel that you've made a mistake, please press the X button and resubmit your vote. A message showing that your vote has been received will appear on the screen, and should you feel that your handset or doubt that your handset is working, please raise your hand and one of my colleagues will come and assist you. For your convenience, we have put together some test resolutions for you. There will be 2 types of voting that will happen. It will be ordinary resolution and election. And just to get into it, can I ask my colleague just to open the first resolution? So for this one, please indicate your vote by either pressing 1 for in favor, 2 against, and 3 to abstain. And then my colleague in the back there will indicate if we have all the votes. One more that we're waiting for. Do all the handsets reflect received on them? Okay. Seeing that there's a test, can we? Yep. Now that it's closed, can you see the results? So 92% are voting in favor and 7% against. The next resolution is a election. So there's a test candidate. So you will press number 4 if you want to abstain. Otherwise, click the number corresponding to the candidate that you would like to choose. Voting is open. Okay, and we will close the vote. Display the results. Thank you very much. And that concludes how the voting will work. Thank you.
We will now proceed to the business of this meeting. I propose that the minutes of the 98th AGM, which were distributed with the annual report 2018/19 be taken as read. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, there being none, these minutes are not for approval, just note and minute any objections if there aren't, but thank you very much. There are no objections or corrections. So I propose that the minutes of the 98th AGM be accepted. The poll is now open and you can exercise your vote. Okay, the poll is now closed. And the voting is, as you see it on the screen, 1 against and 2 abstentions. And the resolution thus carries. So on the basis of these voting results, I declare that the minutes of the 98th AGM has been accepted. Thank you very much. I now formally present to you the financial statements for the year ended 31st March 2019, including the Director's report and the Independent External Auditor's report. The summarized South African Reserve Bank Group annual financial statements were included in the annual report 2018/19, which was published on the SAP's website and posted to shareholders on the 25th of June 2019. The full SAP Group annual financial statements were published separately annual financial statements, including the Director's report and the Independent External Auditor's report. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. If I may make a few...
Can you press the mic so that we can hear you? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shareholding issue. But in terms of this issue, I wanted to propose to extend it even more. Not by increasing the shares, but by increasing the shareholders. And as you correctly state in your address, the debate appears to be about 200,000 rand, which is legible within the context of the Reserve Bank and the financial sector. But it is significant in terms of the influence and control of the financial and financial sector. The reason why people are prepared, as you correctly noted, to pay a lot more than is in fact the investment value of the share, which is the investment value and the dividend there, it is so small that it is in essence forfeitable. I also would like to propose at the same time, because that will open the participation in the activities of the financial sector to a broader spectrum. If that proposal would be recorded as requested. Then I also want to congratulate you on your statement regarding the input of the private shareholders into the processes and as you put it there, the transparency and accountability of the financial sector. However, if I may, I've met you as official of Reserve And my concern is that the accountability and transparency does not flow through. It is some line being blocked. It doesn't reach the board, apparently. And none of the minuted issues in that meeting, which minutes was accepted as correct, was ever addressed till today. And if I may address on that same issue a few of those issues minuted on the 26th of August.
The questions, the thing that I've put to you is the group annual financial statements, including the director's report and the independent external auditor's report. So the stuff that you are referring to in the meeting that you and I had is not the subject of this meeting.
I take that, sir. Let me just get to the group financial statements, and I've got queries there. And the factor of participation in questioning or the financial statements or reports. And if I look at gold and foreign exchange item 5, in terms of the national scope of gold and foreign exchange, and specifically gold seems to be very low. And also on item 10, foreign deposits. Now, in the year presiding this report, I myself, through various international investors, the president in need for the growth of the economy, which was refused or just sidelined. In the same token, it is now common knowledge that Project Hammer has embezzled approximately 3,000 financial statements of the Reserve Bank. I can find such an event.
What is your question on
my question is, why can I find those of the Reserve Bank?
Okay, so that is your question.
My question, yes.
Thank you.
And that is not the only. Let me just list them. I've been in possession of evidence of the embezzlement of another 7,000 tons of gold that was belonging to the country. I've also been forwarded claims about Spiritual Wonder Boy and Wonder Boy Spiritual of the same kind of amounts of 100,000 tons, and the amounts questionably the ownership of White Spiritual Boy accounts in the banking institutions in South Africa, which I forwarded the documentation and never received an answer on it. Say that just park it there.
Okay. Those are your two questions, right?
Yes.
On gold and the stuff. Thank you very much. We have faced questions about increasing the shareholding. We have noted that. We do not have the power to increase the shareholding. That is the preserve of government. It's not us. So the question must be directed to the government. It's not for us. So it will not be dealt with here. This Project Hammer of yours is not featuring anywhere in the thing because it is just that, a fiction of people's imagination. Doesn't exist. And it's incorrect that we did not respond to your thing. I can ask Johan Diacha to tell you that he had responded to the things. And with respect, those things have got nothing to do with the financial. I would like to propose that the audited annual financial statements for the year ended the 31st of March 2019 be accepted. The poll is now open and you can exercise your vote. poll is now closed. Eighteen abstentions, 2 against, 388 for these results. Then I declare that the financial statements of the year ended the 31st of March 2019 have been accepted. Thank you very much. I now turn to the remuneration of the SAP's independent external auditors. The board recommends that the independent external auditors' remuneration of 12,711,871 rand, excluding value-added tax in respect of the general statutory audit of the SAP for the financial year ended the 31st of March 2019 be confirmed and approved. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, not there being none, I propose. Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask concerning the
Can you put the microphone?
Yeah. Thank you, Governor. I wanted to ask, is this remuneration increasing from the previous financial remain unchanged?
Okay, well, we are putting a thing up. Before I get to that, I'll ask the chair.
Thank you, Governor. The Audit Committee, I think, fairly robustly does monitor the extent of increases in the annual audit fees. Salary costs go up on an annual basis, and we take this into are reasonable in relation to the time that they necessarily have to spend. We also make sure that we don't restrict very carefully. In the current year, there were a couple of areas where they charged additional fees over and above the approved original budget, and both ourselves and management. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And any other questions? Yes? Where's your card? Can I see your card? Your card. I want to see your yellow card. Oh, so you are not a shareholder? Oh, no, the meeting is for shareholders. Thank you very much. We can always deal with your questions outside, but the meeting is for the shareholders. I now propose and approved. The poll is now open. The poll is now closed. 52 against and 344 for. On the basis of the voting results, approved. And thank you very much for that. I now turn to 30 of the SAP Act. The SAP's independent external auditors should be appointed by the shareholders at this meeting. The board recommends that Pricewaterhouse for the 2019/20 financial year. I can confirm that the lead audit partners for both firms rotate every 5 years, which is in line with best practice. The SAP will in due course start the process, will be advised of the progress at the AGM in 2020. Are there any questions or comments? Incorporated be reappointed as the SAP's independent external auditors for the 2019/2020 financial year. The poll poll is now closed. 4. On the basis of independent external auditors for 2019-20 financial year. I now turn to the election of non-executive directors. Brad Dutoit, Professor Benjamin Willems, 2019. Dr. Dutoit and Professor Fink have served one term and are available for re-election, whereas Professor considered for the 3 positions were confirmed by the panel appointed in terms of Section 4(1)(c) of the SAP Act. This panel comprises myself, the Governor, retired. It also includes Mr. Kaiser Moyani, Mr. Dumisani Mtalani, and Mr. Bekin Chalinchali, all 3 nominated by the National Economic by the shareholders for each of the 3 vacancies. In terms of Section 4(1)(g) of the SAP Act, the panel is satisfied that all 9 candidates are eligible as well as fit and proper to stand for election as directors of the SAP. The CVs of these candidates were sent to the shareholders together with the notice of this meeting. I now turn to the election of a non-executive director to fill the vacancy for Barbara Dutoit, Ms. Koliswa Kakana, and Ms. Nonkululeko Immaculate Nchona, who were selected as candidates for election in this category. Please exercise your vote by selecting only one person with knowledge and skills in the field of industry from the list of 3 nominees. Please select the number on your voting device that corresponds with the person you wish to elect. Or if you choose to abstain from voting, please select the corresponding number on your voting device. This information is on the screen now. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, the poll is now open and you can exercise your vote. The poll is now closed and the results are 1 abstention, 62 votes for Ms. Nchona, 76 votes for Ms. Kakana, and 319 votes to Dr. Charlotte Barbara Dutoit. On the basis of these results, I declare Dr. Charlotte Barbara Dutoit as being elected as a non-executive director with knowledge and skills in the field of industry. Thank you very much. And congratulations, Dr. Dutoit. Where is she sitting? So in terms of Section 5 of the SAP Act, Dr. Dutoit's appointment shall be effective from the 27th of July 2019 to the day after the AGM in 2022. I now Mr. Faisal Dokrat, Ms. Nolutano Primrose Goza, and Mr. Zoib Hussein were selected as candidates for election in this category. Please exercise your vote by selecting only one person with knowledge and skills in the field of industry from the list of the 3 candidates. Please select the number on your voting device that corresponds with the person you wish to elect. Or if you choose to abstain from voting, please select the corresponding number on your voting device. This information is on the vote. The poll is now closed. That's an interesting one. 52 abstentions, 180 votes for Mr. Zoeb Hussein, 71 for Ms. Goza, and 160 for Mr. Faisal Dokrat. And on the basis of these polls, I declare Mr. Zoeb Hussein as having been elected as a non-executive director. In terms of Section 5 of the SAP Act, this appointment shall be effective from 27 July 2019 to the day after the AGM in 2022. I would like to extend a special word of thanks to Professor Ben Smith for the valuable service he has rendered to the board of the SAP over. I now turn to the election of a non-executive director to fill the vacancy for a person with knowledge and skills in the field of agriculture. Were selected as candidates for election in this category. Please exercise your vote by selecting only one person with knowledge and skills in the field of agriculture. Abstain from voting, please select the corresponding number on your voting device. This information is on the screen now. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, the poll is now open and you can exercise your vote. And the results are 1 abstention, 291 votes for Professor Fink, 141 for Professor Nkomo, and 30 for Mr. Declare that Professor Nicholas Fink has been elected as non-executive director with knowledge and skill in the field of agriculture. Professor Fink is congratulated on his election as non-executive director. In terms of Section 5 of the SAP Act, this appointment shall be effective from the 27th of July 2019 to the day after the AGM in 2022. Professor Fink is not here, but we would like to congratulate him once again for his. I would like to thank Lumi for their assistance and contributions. You kept on doing this at the back there, so I say sharp, sharp. As mentioned earlier, the Secretary of the SAP received no requests from shareholders for special business to be placed on the agenda of this meeting in line with the regulations. Are there any other questions or comments arising from the matters under consideration at this meeting?
I'd like to ask from you is that we've heard the current president of the country mentioning that have rather mandated you and the current Minister of Finance to come up with a way on the issue of economic development and the issue of unemployment in the country. So I just wanted to understand on that high rate of unemployment. That's the first question. And then second is that on the issue of nationalization of SAP. Well, we have heard your comments from social media, or media rather, and we have also captured the views of the. But now, the question is that as shareholders who are not consulted on the issue of nationalization, it's always that we're ambushed. We just hear the governor mentioning that it's not possible, is it possible? And then this might have a bad impact on the rand. But then as shareholders were not consulted. And I believe also now, this is not a good platform to say. I will propose on that to say we'll need to have a meeting to engage on the issue of this nationalization. Because primarily, I think there's a lack of or rather an open space of engagement between us as shareholders and new government.
So what is the question?
The question is solemnly based on, rather, I've said a lot of things. the media and other people who are here
To discuss?
to discuss the issue of nationalization, because from what you are saying on the media, there's no way you mention that the views of shareholders, it says. You just only say the minorities. And it's problematic because you don't know. Because that's why I'm saying this meeting is not meant for that.
Okay.
Hence, hence I'm proposing that we need to have that engagement.
Thank you for your understanding. In terms of I am not aware of any mandate from the president that said that the minister and I must go and work on some issue of employment. The Constitution says there shall be regular consultation between the Minister of Finance and the South African Reserve Bank. The Public Finance Management Act tasked the Minister of Finance with coordination of macroeconomic policy. That is for them to do. We have a mandate. The fathers and mothers of our Constitution understood that you cannot have balanced and sustainable growth in South Africa a necessary condition for balanced and sustainable growth, but it is by no means a sufficient condition for balanced and sustainable growth. You need all. You cannot produce PhDs through monetary policy. You cannot produce engineers through monetary policy. You cannot produce data scientists through monetary policy. That is what we do. I like what the president's focus on growth and employment. We welcome that. And that is where the discussion should take place, not here. On your second issue about, it is tasked with dealing with particular business in terms of the SAP Act. And because do you know why? We can't nationalize ourselves. Whosoever would like to nationalize as members of the public, we are all welcome to engage with a parliamentary process on the nationalization or otherwise of the bank. As the bank have taken a view, and we have spelled out that view. You might have a different parliamentary process, there must be a government process. You can engage with that process. Thank you very much for your understanding. Mr. Fons.
Thank you. Question. But I do have a really problem with this, the format of this AGM, because it number 33552 who mostly deal with the business of the AGM. And there's no limitation placed in terms of this replaced, and if not, then I want you to reconsider the format of this AGM, because it should, in fact, address a kind of format of the Constitution of South Africa, which is the supreme law in any way, and report that the activities in the financial sector holding, where the majority of the shareholders in SAP, I believe, is in the financial sector. What about the other financial sectors? Now, if you look at the committees, there's about 16 of them.
What is your question?
My question is, I want to, through this forum, motivate the change of the shareholders. To who do I address it? Because I'm not going to address it to the channel where everything is stopped and blocked. And I'm asking if I have access to the directors who are supposed to answer or to account to these questions.
Thank you very much. I can switch off your microphone. I am going to refer your question to the channel that is always open.
Governor, hopefully this is the channel. Governor, I must just point out to Mr. Fonsa something which I've pointed out before to him, and that is that this institution is a creature of statute, and it functions in terms of its acts and its laws. And if we talk about the acts, it's first the Constitution, then it's the South African Reserve Bank Act, and then it's the regulations. And I don't know what regulations you have in front of you, Mr. Fonsa, but the current regulations are published in Regulation Gazette 9378 in volume 543, and they were published on the 13th of September 2010, and the number of the Gazette is 33552. It's available, you will be able to get it. Now, just to latch on to what I'm saying, Governor, we are not entitled to move beyond any of the legislation that pertains to us. If we move beyond any of this legislation, it's ultra-virus and we may be challenged. So what my department does is to try and ensure that we move within these parameters. We have been inundated with requests by Mr. Fonsa. We've looked at them, and even with regard to general meetings like this one, and we have looked at them, and they have not met the requirements of the Act. Now, if I can just refer for one moment to this meeting that we have here. If you read the regulations as they actually exist at the moment, it says clearly what this meeting can do and what it is supposed to do. Firstly, all the issues that have been discussed this morning and voted upon are issues that this meeting must consider. If you have any questions or any issues that you want to place, and this is going to sound very, very, hopefully, very, very known to you. You'll know exactly this because I have told you this on many occasions, and I've written you letters on many occasions, and if you want me, I can actually give the letters to the meeting here, but I'm prohibited in terms of Section 33. But you know exactly that if you want to place any business before this meeting, it has to relate to the issues that we've discussed at this meeting. If you want to place any special business before this meeting, it also has to relate to this. And the reason for this being very clear, the shareholders, it's a shareholder meeting, and the shareholders mustn't be tasked with deciding on issues like those many pyramid schemes where you haven't actually received the contents thereof or the monies that have been paid to you. That is not for this meeting here. It just wastes the meeting's time. It is not here for this meeting to decide. Also, not to decide to increase your dividends to 10% of what the profits of the bank is. So these type of issues are not brought here because this meeting doesn't decide on these issues. So I think that is quite clear. And all those issues where you have been told that it cannot be brought to this meeting were because they fell outside the parameters of this meeting. And I'm not going to refer to each and every one of them because you have letters in your possession and discussions that we had that actually points this out.
Thank you very much. Your clarity, General Counsel. Mr. Fons, what is the question? I'm not taking another speech from you.
Let me, Governor, direct you to a clear sentence that means, we can analyze it if possible.
A sentence from where?
From, that is exactly the government cassette.
No, I'm not entertaining the government gazette. If there is a disagreement on the interpretation of the law, there is only one forum where that can be ventilated. It's in a court of law. I am not going to sit here and debate interpretation of statutes. Say.
Governor, I wanted to ask on the issue of the case, the ruling. We have heard on the issue of the public reporters ruling on the High Court. But now the question is that I find it difficult to understand that actually is it the Bangkok did not pay the whole money that SARB loaned, or what did they? Because that's the part that I'm failing to understand on this case. Did Bangkok fail to pay the SARB? Because I think that's another important part that we need to close. Did Bangkok fail to pay, or what was the arrangement? Because when it comes to the interpretation we read on the case, there is very difficult for some of us to comprehend. I wouldn't lie to you, because there are many issues that are mentioned there. But to put it simple, did Bangkok fail to settle that loan, rather, in simple terms?
Okay. It's not the subject of this meeting, but for your benefit, I would like to state the following. The Bangkok thing had nothing to do with the case on Monday. The case on Monday just dealt with the costs. That is what it was dealing with. If you are interested in that case, I refer you to the ruling of the North Gauteng High Court, where these matters were ventilated fully and settled. I do not want to quote from a judgment. That's not my task. I always say to people, read the judgment. The judgment speaks for itself. If you do not understand it, get a lawyer to interpret it for you. The issue of Bangkok have been settled, ventilated, and settled in court. And the parties that were involved who lost in that case didn't even bother to lodge an appeal because the matters were clear. So if you want a copy of the judgment, that judgment is on the SARB website in full. We placed it there so that everybody can read it for themselves. Okay? Mr. Brown.
Governor, if I could I ask a question on monetary policy arising from your remarks in your address on financial stability in the banking system? Thank you. And this, I'll put this in the form of a question.
Yeah, that's what I prefer.
If we look at the risk to financial stability in South Africa, a lot of this stems from the high levels of debt in SOEs and companies such as Eskom. Now, we have seen in the past decade or so central banks elsewhere in the world absorbing so-called bad debt, not only in the banking system, but in companies outside the banks, insurance companies and other financial companies, and pumping in good money. In other words, good debts, and that's quantitative easing, which is something that I don't think the South African Reserve Bank has ever done. But the question is, within the constitutional structure and the mandates of the South African Reserve Bank, could we have a situation emerging in South Africa where the bank would look to absorb debt from companies such as Eskom and replace it with other types of government paper in order to create a quantitative easing scenario in South Africa where you do try and ensure the stability of the banking system and the confidence of global investors in South Africa? Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so that was the last question. Mike, where do I start? Let me say that quantitative easing is not an option for South Africa at the moment. It's part of the toolkit of central banks. But you embark on quantitative easing not because there are bad assets or there are debt problems. You embark on quantitative easing because you are faced with the following two conditions. One is that inflation is so low that it is close to zero and might even be threatening to be negative or is even negative. That's the first one. The second is that you must be faced with a situation where you adjusted your policy rates to the point that they are close to zero, that economists like complicating and call it the zero lower bound. You must meet those two conditions to embark on quantitative easing. Absent those two conditions, what you will be doing will not be quantitative easing. You will just be bailing out debtors. And let's put it to you this way and say that let's imagine that contrary to the law, the Reserve Bank decides to lend money to Eskom unsecured. By law, we must have collateral. So we can't lend to anybody without collateral. But let's suppose some rogue governor was in place and decides to do it, okay? And buys Eskom debt. The debt has not disappeared. The only thing that has changed is that instead of Eskom owing some investor, it is owing the Reserve Bank. It must still pay that interest rate. So you can't make debt disappear a la magic-like, abracadabra, and then the debt disappears. You can't do an abracadabra with debt. The only thing that would have changed would be the ownership of that debt. So instead of Eskom owing some institutional investor or some pension fund, they would now be owing the Reserve Bank. But that would be under the circumstances where you have got rogue governors, and I do not think you have any at the moment. Okay. Thank you very much for that question, Mike. If there are no other matters, then to the best of my knowledge, all the business included in the agenda for today's meeting has been transacted. I would like to thank President Ramaphosa and Deputy President Mabuza, the government and the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa for their continued support. The sound working relationship between the National Treasury and the SARP has continued. I thank Minister of Finance, Mr. Tito Mboweni, the Deputy Minister of Finance, Mr. David Masonto, the Director General, Mr. Dondo Murajani, as well as the staff of the National Treasury for their ongoing support. Sincere thanks are also due to the members of the board for their contributions and for ensuring appropriate corporate governance at the SARP. Sincere appreciation is also due to Deputy Governor Naidu, my only Deputy Governor at the moment, as well as the entire management and staff of the SARP for their continued indication and support during what was once again a challenging year. I would like to thank them all for their contribution. I'm confident that their continued efforts will ensure that the coming year is even more successful. I also wish to thank Mr. Francois Groep, who resigned as the Deputy Governor on the 31st of January 2019, Mr. Daniel Minele, who retired as Deputy Governor on the 30th of June 2019, for their dedicated service to the SARP and the country. Thank you very much indeed. And Mr. Minele is still here. We brought him here just in case there are questions on financial markets that we could have referred to him. May I also take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Rashad Kasim and Ms. Fundi Chasivana to the board as newly appointed deputy governors with effect from the 1st of August 2019. So they are here on the podium as deputy governors designate. The real work starts on the 1st of August. A special word of thanks also to Dr. Crystals. Where did he? Yes, Dr. Crystals. Thank you very much, sir, for your contribution to this country and to the world of central banking. Today, the Reserve Bank is regarded amongst a community of central bankers. Thanks for your stewardship earlier in the history of the bank. And today we can stand tall on your shoulders with the knowledge that you have built a solid institution. And our commitment to you, sir, is that we will defend and protect this institution and its independence and make sure that it lives true to its mandate as tasked by the people of this country. Thank you very much. I understand that Mr. David Monroe skipped his round of golf today and that he would like to say a few words.
Good morning, Governor, Deputy Governor, board members of the South African Reserve Bank, and ladies and gentlemen. It's my great honour to have been asked to address this meeting and to move the vote of thanks. Now, Governor, I have to say that as you were, and I quote, watching the computer eat your homework, a thought came to my mind. And the thought is this, that it's derived from actually a quote that I read in a book last night. The quote was that a book is not a book until it has been read. And my thought was that a speech is not a speech until it's been delivered. And I could see the growing, mounting dismay amongst your colleagues, Governor, as the computer ate your homework. Your colleagues clearly were worried that you were going to go off-piste and ad-lib the rest of your speech, with the Deputy Governor and various other people bringing written copies. So let me say a few words in thanks to you, Governor, and everyone at the South African Reserve Bank. I'm confident that I speak for all South Africa's financial services providers when I express my gratitude and my appreciation for the professionalism, the wisdom and commitment, and indeed the courage displayed by the leaders and officials of the South African Reserve Bank in carrying out your constitutional mandate. I know your predecessors, evidenced this morning by Dr. Stolz being here, have faced down many challenges in this venerable institution's history of almost 100 years. But I'd bet that none of them would have relished being in your shoes over the last few months and years. It's in my experience, courage, integrity, and transparency have long been the central virtues of our central bank. And it's to your great credit that they have never wavered. While many of our country's state institutions are currently working hard to re-establish their credibility, the Reserve Bank has remained a bastion of strong governance and independence. Governor, as fellow South Africans, we are immensely proud of you and your team. As financial services professionals, we understand how critical your efforts have been at reassuring investors, at protecting the stability of the financial sector in South Africa, of maintaining price stability and the value of our currency, and most importantly, strengthening our resilience in the face of ongoing economic challenges. I would like to take the opportunity this morning, Governor, on behalf of the financial services sector, to echo your thanks to Deputy Governor Maneli and Krupa for their many years of services, and in congratulating and welcoming Dr. Rashad Kasim and Ms. Nomfundo Jazibane as the newly appointed deputy governors or designated deputy governors. Ladies and gentlemen, the importance of the South African Reserve Bank's independence and courage cannot be overstated. It is widely accepted that the quality and strength of state institutions and the quality of economic governance are decisive factors underpinning long-run economic growth and human development. Decisive factors that, in the South African Reserve Bank's case, find their reference in the Constitution of our Republic. Governor, we are all impatient for our country to get back on track, to achieve our growth potential, to progress on economic and social transformation, and to regain our standing as an investment destination of choice. Personally, I believe that we are moving in the right direction. The major state-owned enterprises have new boards, the Revenue Service is under new management, the leadership of the National Prosecuting Authority has been overhauled, and a Special Investigative Directorate has been created. In my view, though, the essential human qualities of passion, of confidence, and of boldness are what our country and our economy now needs. And in particular, these are qualities that we, the leadership of the financial sector, need to be brought to bear. Much of the progress that has been made in our country in recent times has been achieved due to the determined and courageous efforts of individuals in the public sector, individuals like those here this morning. So, ladies and gentlemen of the South African Reserve Bank, we applaud you for your service to our country, its people, in this our 25th year of democracy, and we thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for those kind words. And thank you very much for your attendance and participation. I trust that the SAP can continue to count on your support in the future. I now declare this the 99th Annual Ordinary General Meeting of the Shareholders of the South African Reserve Bank closed. Refreshments will be served in the foyer outside this auditorium. Thank you very much.